The Jewish Museum in Berlin, built between 1993 and 1998 by the architect Daniel Libeskind.
Now, I've been to many Jewish cemeteries, always overgrown with vegetation, always in a state of erasure. But in Weissensee, that's what struck me, the huge confidence in a future that was blank. Because all these tombstones which were created for future generations, uncarved, the confidence that for hundreds of years there will be Jewish families continuing to pass on that tradition, struck me as the absolute void, because there was nobody to see, there was nobody remaining from these families to see the emptiness of these slabs of marble. And I thought, yes, that's really the condition of this city and of this state of mind and of the spiritual legacy in Europe and in Berlin and in Germany.
The Kreuzberg district in Berlin was rebuilt in the 60s. Of the old city, razed to the ground by bombardment and battle, there were just bomb sites and a few scattered buildings in the ruins, like the Collegian House, an 18th century building that had once housed the Supreme Court of the Kingdom of Prussia. On a plot next to this charming Baroque edifice, the city Senate decided in 1988 to build a new Jewish museum to replace the one that the Gestapo had closed exactly half a century before. 165 architects entered the competition. One of them was young, unknown, Daniel Libeskind.
I came to the site, but all the architects were 200 and were with cameras, photographing, filming. I had no interest at all, because I didn't really take, of course I looked at the site, you have to be aware of the site, but the site is not just a piece of real estate in Berlin, because the Jewish history is slightly below the level of the real estate. It's not really deeply buried, but it's a few centimeters certainly below the ground you step. So it's not a project I went to the library and took photographs and had to find out exactly the orientation of the project, because it's already oriented. It's oriented in the world by, first of all, the catastrophes, the complete extermination of European Jews, and also in locations and topography of the city place, in names and addresses and people who are not abstract, cannot really be made into numbers in the Gedenkbuch, but are actual citizens who continue to live even in their absent state. They continue to haunt the place.
According to Libeskind, the real inspiration for the building was Walter Benjamin's book Einbahnstraße, One-Way Street, and Schoenberg's opera Moses and Aaron, a work in 3 acts with no music beyond the end of the second act. Libeskind wanted his building to be a prolongation of this unfinished musical work. To show that he was serious, he wrote his proposal on the staves of a musical score and entitled it Between the Lines. From the lines on the surface that stripe the facades, up to the extraordinary broken line that contorts the whole mass from end to end of the plot, the line, in all its variety, governs the building. Berliners immediately nicknamed it the Blitz, lightning. For Libeskind, the tortured form of this zigzag embodies all the violence, all the ruptures in the history of Jews in Germany. In spite of the force of its expression, the movement is less arbitrary than it might appear to be. There were beautiful trees on the site. In the center of the composition, it is not history, but the simple presence of one of these trees that makes the building change direction. The lightning shape is only really intelligible from the sky. From lower down, the new construction is much more discreet. There is no intention of outshining the Baroque building, whose height it respects. Hidden in the trees, it is hardly visible from the road, to which it shows just a narrow segment that might easily be the back of the building as its side, so lacking is it in any distinctive sign, or more especially, of any way in. Nothing external links the two buildings, which appear just to be set down one beside the other. Yet the entrance to the new Jewish museum is from inside the Baroque pile. It is a large entrance in untreated concrete with sharp angles. It opens onto a staircase that, instead of sweeping up nobly to the upper floors, as is to be expected in museum staircases, goes underground. The visit to the Jewish museum starts in the foundations of the old building. But Libeskind immediately reverses this suggestion. If you lift your head, you see that the staircase is at the very bottom of a concrete well that, without any functional justification, pierces the old building at every level so that the architect allows a view of all floors up to the eaves. The Jewish Museum and the historic German monument are intertwined just like the history of Germany and the history of the Jews, with a monstrous but hidden violence. The concrete tower guards the entrance to the underground area that seems at first sight to be much more simple than the broken line of the surface building. Yet this is the real heart of the whole project. There are 3 corridors. The presence of a central island means that only 2 can be seen at a time. It is impossible to have an overall vision. Libeskind calls these corridors axes. An axis is the straight line about which the parts of a body or system are symmetrically arranged. The 3 axes here embody in space the 3 major experiences in German Judaism: continuity, exile, and death. 3 paths with many branches, harshly emphasized by the lines of light in the ceiling. This is not a place for a stroll through a museum, but a testing journey, an ordeal.
These are not free spaces. These are really very ideologically derived spaces. I happen to believe that space has its own authentic capacity, and it has to be linked to experience. Otherwise, you would not really need architecture, just machinery. So yes, I did use architecture means, the materials, proportions, light, all the things that are really the tradition of architecture, in order to create a space that really actually never existed. Really, there hasn't been a building that has a main door in a Baroque building that you have to go down 12 meters below the foundations, that has staircases and main features of circulation which are completely not in the sequence in which you would expect to find them in a building. That's part of really delving into the experience of Jews in Berlin. It's not just made for scenographic or filmic reasons. It's thought out, and whatever its virtue, it connects to some form of experience that I think is important to communicate.
Just as in the legendary tale, only one of these 3 paths leads to the museum galleries. It is the longest one that Libeskind calls the axis of continuity, the continuity of a Jewish presence in Germany. It opens onto a staircase that at first sight seems to be quite modest. Then a sudden spectacular perspective reveals itself, the only one of this size in the whole of the building. A straight line rising from basement to the third floor. After compressing space, the architect expands it. The sequence is classic, the effect is guaranteed. But Libeskind only frees space in one direction, upwards. The staircase is no wider than the underground passage, contained between two walls that the great concrete beams stabilizing the structure seem to have great difficulty in holding apart. This underlines the effort, the difficulty of making one's way along the path to return to the light of day. The axis of continuity is no more than a passage leading to the upper floors of the museum. The other two underground axes are exhibition areas. The cabinets designed by the architect display nothing exceptional in the way of art, just photos and children's drawings, such as every family owns. Except that here, the simplest of them are souvenirs of exile and extermination. Two fates to which these corridors with their sloping walls and raked floor lead. This one is called the axis of the Holocaust. It ends at a black door. Behind the door is a concrete tower plunged into obscurity. The Tower of the Holocaust. Blank walls illuminated by a slit that lets in the daylight. That is the only opening towards the outside. The Tower of the Holocaust is in fact outside the new building, connected to it only by the subterranean axis. In treating it as separate volume, the architect puts it beyond the limits of the museum experience, in a sort of symmetry with the hidden entrance tower. Crossing the axis of the Holocaust, the third axis is that of exile. This is the scenario of the leaving of Germany that leads right outside into the open air. Libeskind calls this area the Garden of Exile. It is a hanging garden, perhaps in allusion to the exile in Babylon. But these trees, planted in 49 concrete pillars, are also simply an image for uprooting. Exile seen as the loss of a reference point. The garden is a labyrinth of leaning pillars that destabilizes and nearly unbalances the visitor. In fact, this is a perfect square, the only place in the museum with strict right angles. But the architect has tipped it to create a double 10-degree slope so that when walking through the pillars, the pitch changes at every turn. Like the Tower of the Holocaust, the garden is a dead end. Contrary to its appearance, it is completely cut off from the outside by a dry moat worthy of a fortress. The escape into free air is an illusion. Exile is also imprisonment. There is no other way out than to return to the underground axes. The old and the new buildings, the Tower of the Holocaust and the Garden of Exile, are linked by a hidden network of communications and directions. But on the surface, the architect has deliberately treated them as independent elements. The visible concrete of the Tower of the Holocaust and the pillars in the Garden of Exile are quite distinct from the main building, which is completely covered in zinc.
It was always my idea that the building should be covered by a very thin metal, that it should not expose its construction, which is severe, tectonic, very kind of modern. I wanted the building to be completely wrapped in a soft material, and I used a non-oxidized zinc, which is changing over the next decade, becoming grayish, bluish. So I never meant it as a shiny building like Bilbao or something like that, just something that will recede in its figure, but then the cuts will become, I think, more striking in time. I think the kind of slashes, because they're not really windows, planes moving through the building, will become more readable in time.
Gashes, cuts, scars, the openings in the building break with all systems of composition, modern or traditional. It is the result of the superimposition of two distinct schemes. The first is functional for the offices on the top floor and the service areas, for which the architect has created simple windows, even if he has given them such particular shapes that they had to be made by a manufacturer of windscreens. Even the linear openings that stripe the body of the building are part of a scheme that owes nothing to architecture. To make them, Libeskind drew lines on a plan of the city of Berlin to link the addresses, real or imaginary, of emblematic figures of German Judaism. Then he projected the resulting diagrams onto the volumes of the building to create a totally haphazard pattern. The effect that these openings have on the inside of the building is equally astonishing, except that these are the galleries of a museum, posing the problem of how to hang things on walls that look like something out of the decor of a 20s German expressionist film, a nightmare for the curator. The question of hanging did not come up for a long time. Although the building was finished in 1998, the museum project was constantly being reconsidered and postponed, as much because of German reunification as because of the preconceptions of the architect. There was nothing to display, and yet in 1999 the museum was opened to visitors. 350,000 people visited the empty museum in 2 years. Many of them thought that it was better like that it was the architecture itself that was on display. But they did not spend 120 million marks on a building for it to remain empty. In September 2001, the museum was finally officially inaugurated with a collection of more than 4,000 objects, all bearing witness to 2,000 years of Jewish presence in Germany. Success came like lightning. Of course, it was necessary to make a few changes. Interior decorators from Munich were employed for the work. Walls, panels, columns, and display cabinets, stairs and mezzanine floors spread through the galleries, obliterating their singularities, blocking up the windows, covering up the openings, rounding off the angles. Yet something of the architecture stood firm. The comforting continuity of the museum route was disturbed several times by these bare black blocks where the exhibition stops. These are the concrete towers that traverse the building at all levels. There are 6 of them, all different in shape. The only lighting comes from skylights. There is nothing in them. There is no way into them. The architect calls them the voids. They are the incarnation of the final figure in German Judaism, absence. There is no hint of these empty towers from the outside. Only the skylights make a dotted line along the roof, cutting through the zigzag. The last line in the building, the ghostly line of everything that was destroyed. The voids are a refusal to give way to nostalgia, the negation of the very idea of a museum. There is nothing to see through these slits unless it is the surprised faces of the visitors.
You can imagine this is not a project I could just develop in my office and show a few people nice drawings. I had to meet every week with 50 bureaucrats of the city who challenged every line. Mr. Libeskind, why are we paying money to build a space that is useless, that is not heated and it's not really a museum space? You can call it a void, but reduce it to something which is, really economically viable. But I try to convince them that it's necessary to organize the museum around completely different ideas about a museum, because such a museum is necessary now. It's not a story you can just put to rest once and for all and say, you've finished with it, and now you've done the museum and you can move on to new things. It's a story that forever, eternally, will create a tension between the substance of that story, what can be told and what can never be told, what can only be intuited, and what will always remain something that subverts any attempt to control, make the story finite and finish with it. And I think that's really the part of the challenge of building such a building.
A single example of this emptiness is accessible to the visitor. It is the principal one. It is called the void of memory.